Hey everybody, and welcome to today's video in which we are going to take a look at how we can create the chamfered look on a simplified geometry by using a VRay node. Now, before I start anything, I want to show you what kind of a scene I have set up. It's a very basic scene. Namely, I only have one VRay, actually a physical camera. I have VRay dome light with an HDRI setup on it for lighting, and a backdrop on which I can render. So if I render this thing out, this is basically how my scene looks like. And as you can see, all of these elements here are simple boxes, except this one, which is a simple element where you have both of these sides extruded to get the legs. Now, I want to use up this thing as a sort of bench that you would find in any park, one of those concrete benches, and try and start going from there. So what I want to get here is I want to have a way of, when I render this, not to have these very sharp edges, because when you have edges this sharp, this kind of breaks the illusion that this is a CGI. It kind of breaks up the realism. Plus, you don't have enough geometry to help with a light bouncing off the edges, so you kind of lose a bit more of the realism. So in order to get that chamfer look, the easiest way would be to basically select all of these elements and use a chamfer modifier. By using a chamfer modifier, you can basically tell it how much of a chamfer amount you would like to have. This is 0.5 with a tension of 0.5, and you would get that chamfered look on the edges. But the problem here is that this will add a bit more geometry, albeit not too much, but at certain points it might actually cause an issue, as you would have to go in here and clean up this geometry. So not the ideal way of fixing this, and it will add a bit more work to do. So what I would like to do here is, first of all, I'm going to go back and delete this chamfer. Or here's another thing. In case you downloaded this model off of some website and it's already chamfered like this, the easiest way to simplify this would be just hit on Edit Poly, select all the vertices, weld them together at a certain weld edge, threshold, and they're going to get welded together, so there will be no issues and everything is going to get very simplified. So instead of this, I'm going to go back and select these, delete, select all of these, and delete the chamfers. All right, so we're back to where we started. So the first thing I want to do is I want to put texture on this. So I'm going to create a material. For this, I'm going to use the slate material editor. I've been trying to use this more, as when working with Unreal, you get to do a lot of this type of material creation, so I'm going to try and follow along with Max as well, so bear with me. First thing that I want to do is put out a VRay material. Zoom in a bit. There we go. And I want to select all of the elements where I want to have that material and apply it to the selection. All right, now I want to add in a couple of maps that would help me with my creation. For this, I basically have three maps, which is the concrete diffuse, the concrete reflection, and the bump. These are basically just a seamless concrete texture. If you don't know how to create a seamless texture, check out one of my previous videos. I have covered that topic. So for this, I'm going to go in and drag in the bitmap for the diffuse map, put it in here, drag in the reflection and the bump. So go into the bump and go into the reflection glossiness. There we go. And also, since I'm using a reflection glossiness, I want to put in a reflection value or I can simply go in and put this thing into the reflection map. So now this thing is going to control the glossiness. Actually, I'm going to clear this. So we have a reflection map here. All right. So let's go here and click Show Shaded Material in Viewport so I can see how this thing looks like. I'm going to move it to the side. And one of the things that I'm going to notice is that my UVs are not the way they should be, because I have some stretching and it's not ideal. So what I want to do here is, instead of going ahead and manually unwrapping this, I'm going to hit a UVW map for this and make it a box and give it a uniform scale. So I'm going to go and put in, let's say 200 by 200 by 200. That's going to give me a box. It's pretty much, you can use any value that you want. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here. So it's going to paste the modifier with the same properties. Do it here as well, paste, and do it here. So paste. All right, now that we have this, I want to go in and do a quick render check and see how this thing looks as it is. So I'm gonna hit render last. And from what I can see, now as soon as the render is done, I have, well, a semi-decent material for the concrete look I was going for. I probably should increase the tiling, but for this video, it's really not that important. So for this, I'm simply going to close it and continue. So now comes the interesting part, or how we get the edges to look more rounded without actually changing the geometry of whatever that we are working with. This can be achieved with a VRay node called VRay Edges Texture. The way this texture works, it actually has two modes. In the first mode is when you use it in the diffuse channel. This when you use it in the diffuse channel, it gives off a different result. Namely, I want to create this teapot and I'm going to place it on top of the table here, like so. I'm going to create another VRay material for it. So I'm going to go here, create a VRay material, apply it to the teapot, as like so. Give it some color. Let's try with black. We're going to make it a black. And now I'm going to scroll down and from here choose a VRay Edges Texture and drop it in here. And from here, I'm going to node this thing into the diffuse map. Now, what this thing is going to do is basically going to give me the ability to render sort of a wire mesh for whatever this thing has been applied to. So in this case, since the outline color of this thing is going to be, for this material, is going to be something like blackish, I want to double click on the edges texture, and here I can control the color for the lines. So in this case, I'm going to leave them as white. So for now, I'm going to scroll this down a bit, open up this thing, and just render out this area here where I'm guessing that teapot is. So I'm going to hit render. And as you can see, I can see the teapot and all of the wire mesh, or all of the edges that are on the actual model. So this is a very interesting note because it has a secondary look as well. The secondary look comes when you use this VRay Edges Texture, but instead of using it inside the diffuse map, you use it in the bump map. Now, let's do this. I'm going to take my original material, and since I do have a bump map that I want to use here, I'm going to need to multiply this bump map that I have here with this VRay Edges Texture. So for this, I'm going to put in another VRay Edges Texture, like so. And since I want to get both of these into one, I'm going to go in here and go up and from here choose a composite map. Let's just find it. All right, here we go, a composite map. A composite map is basically a map that has multiple bitmaps into it, plugged in. In this case, I'm going to double click on it and just go in and add in one more, add a new layer. Great. And now I want to go in here, plug this thing to the layer 2, plug this thing to layer 1, and plug this into the bump map. Awesome. Now this thing will give me the ability to go in my VRay textures, and here I have this rounded corners option. By default, this thing is put to 0.1. So let's see how this thing looks like when you render it at the default size. So just so I can see the difference, I'm going to save this as it is right now. So I'm going to take just this little area here, re-render, and I can barely see something changing. So let's make this a more prominent change. So instead of leaving it at 0.1, I'm going to go in and change this to something like 0.5 centimeters. Now I'm going to put this to the side and re-render again. So now I can actually see the changes happening. So if I turn off the region render, you're going to notice that as the edges come to the border where I had the render, you can see this little glow here, this reflection. That is due to the fact that now the edges are being rounded up thanks to that VRay edges texture. So if I go in here and instead of putting this to 0.5, I can further increase this to something a lot larger, which will probably break the immersion, but let's just go a bit overboard and put in something like 3 centimeters and see how that thing is gonna look like. So again, I'm just gonna do it on a small region, or better yet, do it on just a tiny bit bigger region so I can get a bit more edges. So render. And now, as you can see, even though this is very exaggerated, you can see that this type of an approach has its merits, but as well has its drawbacks. The major drawback being that if you go overboard, you're going to get all of these lighting issues here and here, because this is just a visual quick fix or a visual cheat. You're not actually getting more geometry. So let's get this thing down. I'm going to try actually with 1 because I want to see if I can get a bit more rounding without getting the lighting issues. So let's try with 1. And I can see that at 1, I'm pushing the limits a bit, but I think we can work with this. So I'll leave it at 1 for now. All right, so let's continue and try and see how we can further improve this. In order to get a bit more realism pushed out of this approach, I want to give it a bit more wear and tear. Namely, if let's say, for example, this thing was put in some sort of a outside scenario, be it a park or anything, even a garden, you would get wear and tear in ways that when people would be sitting, they would rest their either their hands or their legs, and this thing will have a different value for a different set of this table. So certain edges would be more rough, others would be more sharp, and some would be more smooth. So let's give it a bit more variety. So I want to have places where I have this smoothness and other places where it's a bit more sharp. So it's an easy way of doing it, and it gives it that bit of extra realism. In order to get that, what we need to do is, since this thing is basically not needed, I'm going to move it to the side. So what I'm going to do is take the entire material, hold down Shift, pull it down. This thing is going to clone it. All right, so since I cloned it, I want to have another version in which I only have the bitmap or the bump map going directly into this. So go into the bump map, select this thing. All right, so this is the initial version, and this is the version where you have the rounded edges. So I want to blend both of these. So go into the VRay blend material, like so. And from here, put this thing into the base, and put this thing into the coat 1. So if I double click, you're going to see that I have the base material and the coat material. I want to have a map which will blend both of these materials based on predefined parameters. In this case, I can use either a bump map, so let's see, a noise map, something like this. So double click on this thing. I want to see how this thing looks like. So in order to see how this thing looks, I'm going to select this. And since this is a map material, I'm going to go in here, choose a VRay material, drop it and put it there, and put the noise into my diffuse map. Awesome. Now put it so it's showing in preview. Nope. There we go. What I want to do here is double click and increase, or actually decrease the size. So let's try something like, let's see, size like 15. Is this thing going to show up? Yep, it's starting to show up. I want to decrease the blur to something like 0.1. Try a size of 5. Yeah, it's an okay size because it's going to have the black and white. I can increase, well, actually that's fine. So blur 0.01, size a bit smaller. Yeah, I think this is a fine size, but let's try with something like this. Yeah, this should work. All right, so this noise is, the scale of this noise is fine. So I want to get this thing and put it in the blend 1. That is going to be the map for this thing. Sorry, so I don't need this thing anymore. So now what I want to do is take this blend material and apply it here as well. So let's go assign to material. And now let's render and see what we get when we render the whole thing. So hit render. And as I can see now, all the edges are not uniform as they used to be, but I have certain edges where they are sharper, then it kind of goes into a more rounded portion, then gets sharper again, like here on the edge, then gets to be a bit more smooth. So all of this is basically controlled by the noise. Now if you want to have a different type of flow for this thing, you need to change your noise map, or if you don't want to use a noise map, you can use a custom map where you can actually define where all of those white and black areas are going to be. Or if you want to have a different type of noise, you might want to try out using a Burcon noise. They have different types of noises. Burcon noise is basically part of a plugin that you can download. I'll leave a link in the description so you can get the Burcon noise, and from there get a more different result. So that would be it for now. I hope you guys had fun and you managed to learn something new. If you have any questions, leave them below. I will meet you in the comment section of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, and if you're not subscribed, now is a great time to do so. Also, another thing I would like to add is that some of you are using Unreal and you actually know a way how you can do something like this inside Unreal, leave me a comment, as I would really appreciate it. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.